There's enough of a trail here to see that somebody sometimes comes along, but not very often. Good morning, Moses Lake Christian Church, and welcome to this Easter morning. I'm coming to you today from an old cemetery. It's really in the middle of nowhere. And as this all began, I thought about coming to this cemetery. I was shown this cemetery a few years back by a friend, and I've always been amazed by it. It's really been abandoned. There's nothing out here. It's just a cemetery, and it's all overgrown, and it's surrounded by sagebrush, and there's some fields here, and it feels forgotten. It's kind of a lonely place. The gravestones here are some of them from the turn of the century, not this century, but the last century. And when I come here, I wonder about the lives of the people who were buried here. What were their hopes? What were their dreams? What were their visions when they came out here? At one point, something around here was thriving. Where did they come from? What made them come here? How did their lives end? Where are their families now? And so when I started to think about Easter, I started to think about where I would deliver that message from, and this was the place that I thought about, and that's been a few weeks back. Since then, we've actually faced some more death and hardship and pain, even in our church family, as we've lost our friend Larry Verhage, and a significant part of our community, and we're reminded again that death comes, and sometimes it comes quickly. But Easter comes to us out of death. And so I was thinking about this story from Luke chapter 24, verses 1 through 12. I want to read that to you. But on the first day of the week, at early dawn, they went to the tomb, taking the spices they had prepared. And they found the stone rolled away from the tomb. But when they went in, they did not find the body of the Lord Jesus. They were perplexed about this. Behold, two men stood by them in dazzling apparel. And as they were frightened and bowed their faces to the ground, the men said to them, "Why do you seek the living among the dead? He's not here, but is risen. Remember how he told you while he was still in Galilee that the Son of Man must be delivered into the hands of sinful men and be crucified on the third day he would rise?" And they remembered his words, and returning from the tomb, they told all these things to the 11 and all the rest. Now, it was Mary Magdalene and Joanna and Mary, the mother of James, and the other women with them who told these things to the apostles. But these words seemed to them an idle tale, and they did not believe them. But Peter rose, and he ran to the tomb, and stooping and looking in, he saw the linen cloths by themselves, and he went home marveling at what had happened. Now, what do we know about the story? Well, there's a lot that we know about the story. One of the things we know is that the disciples were afraid. They didn't know what had happened. I mean, think about what had happened to them in just 2 weeks' time. They'd gone from being with Jesus and this promising life that he was talking about, and they were doing this ministry, and they were seeing miracles and all kinds of things, and they were on top of the world, and just in a couple of weeks it goes downhill very quickly. And it ends in the death of Jesus on Good Friday. He's crucified. And so then we find the disciples hiding. They're in the upper room. They're locked away. They're not sure. Imagine what the days were like from Friday evening until Sunday morning. It's very quiet. It's the Sabbath. No activity from sun going down on Friday, really until that Sunday morning, the first day of the week. They're not sure what's going to happen. They're afraid of many things. They're afraid for their own lives. They were known to be with Jesus. What was it going to mean from there? The women have been waiting. They've been waiting to go and take care of Jesus and to prepare his body properly for burial. They hadn't been able to do that until now. And none of them knew what was going to happen to them. Sometimes life just doesn't work out the way we think, and it can create fear in us. We're living through a really challenging and interesting time right now as we continue as a city and as a state and a country and really as a world to see where are things going to go with the coronavirus. What is this shutdown going to do? We're afraid of multiple things. We're afraid of the virus itself. When we first began to hear about it, we were told death tolls that were astronomical. They were huge, and so we began to think about how do we stop this? How do we sort this out? And now, as it's gone on, we begin to wonder: okay, should we have shut down, and should we not have? There are a lot of questions that we're asking, and now we're afraid for other things. It seems that we're afraid for the economy. Many people have been out of work, and what is this going to mean, and how is this all going to roll out, and what's really going to happen, and how quickly will this all return? How will we be able to get back and get our economy rolling again? There are a lot of questions. And there were a lot of questions for the first disciples. They were afraid. They weren't sure what was going to happen, and their fear moved to confusion when they actually go to the tomb. It says, that they got to the tomb. They had spices. They were going there to prepare Jesus' body for burial. And so when they got to the tomb, they were expecting some things, and they were not expecting other things. What were they expecting? Well, the one thing they were expecting for sure was to find Jesus' body there. They come with an expectation that they're going to prepare Jesus' body for burial with the spices that they brought. Here's what we learn from the simple bits of the story. They come with no expectation of resurrection. Right? They aren't coming to welcome Jesus back to life. They're coming to properly send him into death. They expect to find the stone in front of the entrance of the cave in which Jesus' body had been laid. Here's what the Gospels say about it. We've read Luke, but in Matthew 28, verses 1 through 10, it says, "There was an earthquake because an angel of the Lord had descended and rolled back the stone and sat on it. His appearance was like lightning, his clothing white as snow, and the guards were terrified and paralyzed by what they were witnessing." In Mark chapter 16, verses 1 through 8, it says that the women went after the sun had risen, and they were actually asking each other, "Who will roll away the stone so that we can get in?" In Mark, they enter the tomb, and there they meet a young man, and he's dressed in white. In John chapter 20, verses 1 through 18, we get another version of the story. The women go to the tomb, but they go and get Peter and John, and Peter and John run ahead to the tomb, and they go in. But Mary is weeping outside the tomb, and she sees two angels dressed in white who ask her, "Why are you weeping?" It's a confusing story. They're confused. Why are you weeping doesn't seem to be the right question. Or why are you seeking the living among the dead doesn't seem to be the right question. They're confused about what's going on. And now some people say that because these stories don't line up, it means that it wasn't authentic, that it didn't really happen. However, more people think that because the stories don't line up, it gives veracity to the story. I mean, I'm not a detective, and I don't play one on TV, but when everyone who witnesses a thing agrees exactly and their stories all line up exactly, the conclusion is likely someone has coached everyone to tell the same story. People don't see things or remember things in the same way. We remember them differently when events happen and different people tell the story, partly because, particularly when really challenging things happen, It's a confusing time. There's a lot of excitement. There's a lot of ways of seeing things, and so people tell stories different. But what does line up? What are the things that are consistent? Well, first of all, the women are the ones in all the stories who come and find the tomb empty at first. They all have the angels, somebody dressed in white. They meet someone outside the tomb. The other thing that's interesting is that there's no body. They all agree that there's no body. Jesus isn't there. Their expectation about Jesus and his life and his death don't meet reality. Their vision of the Messiah was one thing, and when that all came to an end, they thought it was over. And so when they go to the tomb, they don't expect to find it empty. They expect to find it full. And the other thing that all stories agree on is that they were amazed. They were amazed at what happened. They couldn't get their heads around. There was nothing that had prepared them for this moment of resurrection. And when they're asked the question, why do you seek the living among the dead? They remembered that Jesus had said that he would rise again, but they weren't prepared for that. And so we find the disciples after Jesus' death afraid, wondering what's going to happen, where are we going to go, how's this all going to work out, and confused. Why is the tomb empty? How did the stone get rolled back? Who are these people around the tomb? Where's he gone? And they're amazed. They're amazed at what's happened. The apostles, when the women go back, they thought it was an idle tale, and they didn't believe it, to the point that they had to go and take a look for themselves. Peter rose and ran to the tomb, and stooping in, he saw the linen cloths by themselves, and he went home, it says, marveling. God reminds us in the resurrection that he takes really challenging, really broken stories, and he can bring some amazing things out of them. You remember Thomas in the upper room. Jesus appears to the disciples, but Thomas wasn't there. And Thomas, when they tell him about having seen Jesus, says, I'm not going to believe it unless I can put my hands in his side and my fingers in the nail holes. And then Jesus shows up and shows Thomas, come here. Let me show you. I was asking myself this question over the last couple of weeks. God, what do you want to say to us in the midst of this crisis, in the midst of this challenging time that we're all facing? What do you want to say to us in resurrection? And these two thoughts came to me. He said, I want you to remember that I haven't forgotten you. And I want you to remember that I have something for you. You know, as I sit here in this cemetery, it feels like it's a forgotten place. It's not been cared for. There are people who are buried here that it doesn't appear anyone comes to visit very often. But this is not a place that God's forgotten, and these are not people God's forgotten. And we're not people that God's forgotten. I've been reminded over the last couple of weeks about a lot of things. I think it's interesting. I don't really follow sports very much, not because I think it's a bad idea to follow sports. I'm just not very good at it. I don't have a long enough attention span. But I think as all the athletics have been shut down, and as we have not been allowed to go to movies, and as all of our cultural things that we love to do and the things that we follow, they've all been shut down. No one's listening to famous people, athletes and actors at this point in time. Those folks have kind of been forgotten. I smiled to myself the other day as Dr. Anthony Fauci stepped to the microphone to speak, and you can barely see him over it. And I thought, we've forgotten all of the famous people that we paid attention to all the time. And now everyone is hanging on every word of an 80-year-old, 5'5" bespectacled scientist who's trying to help us manage this situation. We've started to remember the people who really make a difference around us. Think about the people we've been paying attention to. In the UK, and in the evening, people come out of their doors and they applaud for the medical workers and the service workers and the people who are keeping their world going. We're not watching famous people now. We're watching teachers, and we're watching first responders, and we're watching healthcare workers, and we're clapping for them, and we're watching people who are running the emergency management systems. We're paying attention to the people who are providing what we actually need, the people who are still at work. God says, I haven't forgotten you. The cemetery is not the end of the story, and the resurrection reminds us that there's something else coming. And so God said, I want to remind you that I haven't forgotten you. And so let me remind you about that. That in the midst of our fear and our confusion and concern about what's going on around us, God has not forgotten us. He's paying attention. He's present with us where we are in the midst of our situation. I hear us saying around our country and from the religious community, you know, it's going to be amazing when this is over. We're praying for a revival, or some big things are going to happen, and it's going to be incredible, and what's God going to do when we get through this? And I've been thinking that what God may want more than that is to say, what am I going to do in it? Not through it, not when it's over. Let's not wait until this is all over to see what God has for us. But what does he have for us now? And so he's reminded me, I haven't forgotten you. I'm still paying attention. Nothing escapes my notice. And then I have something for you. God is still at work in the midst of this situation, which seems pretty challenging. In the resurrection, God says, I can turn really awful situations around and bring life, even out of death. And so I want to invite you to think about, first of all, what are you afraid of? What's caused fear in your life over the last few weeks? Maybe for you it's loneliness. Maybe for you it's the economy. Maybe for you it is fear of death and fear of the virus. Last week I said, make a list of those things you can't control and really worry about those things. What are the things that are causing you to fear? Maybe even make a list of those and ask yourself the question, what am I afraid of in this time? And then, what are the things that are confusing to you in these moments? It's really helpful to name these things, to think about what are the things that shake us up. Because what God wants to take is our fear and our confusion, and he wants to turn that into wonder. He wants to turn that into amazement, into astonishment, that we can see that God can bring us out of a really challenging situation and make something brand new from it. And so, what are the ways that God can be at work in your life? One of the best things about being a grandpa, now we have 2 grandchildren, but Vida, our oldest granddaughter, is really at a fun stage. She's starting to learn so many things, and she's doing so many things. She's running, and she's picking up things, and she wants to read books. And one of my favorite things about Vida, one of the things I love the most, is when she says, "Again." She says, "Do it again," but she says it like that, "Again." I was just at their place a couple of weeks ago, and we were reading books, and I read the same book to her 15 times. Right in a row. Children want to do things again. They wonder at things. They want to do things that we find mundane. They want to do things that we don't get excited about anymore. I love this quote by G.K. Chesterton. He wrote this: because children have abounding vitality, because they are in spirit fierce and free, therefore they want things repeated and unchanged. They always say, "Do it again." And the grown-up person does it again until he's nearly dead. It's true. For grown-up people are not strong enough to exult in monotony, but perhaps God is strong enough to exult in monotony. It is possible that God says every morning, do it again to the sun, and every evening, do it again to the moon. It may not be automatic necessity that makes all daisies alike. It may be that God makes every daisy separately, but has never got tired of making them. It may be that he has the eternal appetite of infancy. For we have sinned and grown old, and our Father is younger than we. And so I want to invite us to return to childhood and watch expectantly and say, do it again, God. Let's see what you have for us. Let's see the wonder of how you can take these moments that we're living in, these moments of fear, and turn them into wonder. And so what will God do in the midst of the things you can't change? What can God do in and around and through you? What can God do in our neighborhoods, in our cities, in our country, and in our world, in the midst of this really challenging times? It's really interesting to me to hear the ideas of what people are doing to help each other out. Ideas that have been floating around that we're going to begin to think about how to implement them is to get people walking in their neighborhoods and praying for their neighbors. Maybe leaving notes to say, how can we help in this time of need? All over the world, we're hearing stories of the way people are rising up to meet needs. People are being creative in the ways that they're loving and encouraging each other. We heard of an art walk that happened last week in Pelican Point, where children did art projects and they sat them out and people could walk around and look at them. The opportunity today is to watch for what God is doing. And that first Easter, they were afraid. What's going to happen? How's this all going to work out? What's going to happen to us? They were confused. Who rolled away the stone? Where's the body? Where have you put him? What's going to happen next? But they were amazed as the risen Lord appeared to them and as they saw the gospel unfolding in a way they'd never expected. How will God meet us in these moments? It's for us to watch expectantly, to see what he'll do. You know, we've all been told that things sometimes work better when you unplug them and plug them back in. We've kind of been unplugged. And it's maybe in some ways not a bad thing. It is a challenging thing for many. The economic challenges are significant. The health challenges are significant. The challenges of isolation are significant. But God has not forgotten us. And God has something for us. Let's watch and wait and step forward into the wonder of what God will do. And may God strengthen your body and keep you healthy. May he encourage you in this time. May God give you work to do that is meaningful, even in the midst of this healing work and helping work. May God show you his deep love and grace in the midst of this. May he show it to you through other people. May he show it to you through his word. May God preserve your relationships in your homes and in your friendships, in the ways that you work. And may God strengthen your faith as we continue to walk this out. And maybe asking these questions. What am I afraid of? What's confusing to me? God, what do you have for me in this moment? What do you have for me to do in this moment? How can I step forward into this and live in the power of the resurrection? Not waiting for it to get over, but engaging it today, right now, in the power of Christ.